We're all set.
We are thrilled to be with all of you today, virtually as it is. We wish that it could be in person, but it's 2020, and so nothing's the way we want it to be. But we've got a great lineup of leaders from higher ed and from the broader cybersecurity industry to share some thoughts about the environment we're operating in today, to share some lessons that they've gained along the way, and to hopefully educate us all about both the environment we're operating in and some of the things that we can do to keep our networks and our businesses safe. Before we get started, we want to say a quick thank you to Dave Marble and his entire team at Ocean. They are great partners, both in this event, but more generally in the way all of our institutions operate. And so we want to thank him and his team for all of their support, not just today, but in general. The folks that we've got lined up have tremendous resumes. I could spend the next hour going through all of their accomplishments and all that they've done. In the interest of time, I'm gonna just sort of give you the top line on each of our speakers today, and then we're gonna dive right into some questions. The idea in all of this, though, is that we want to be able to capture the things that you, the audience members, are interested in. So if you have a question, if there's something that you want to ask of these great panelists, use the Q&A function on the right hand side of your screen, or use the chat function. I'll be monitoring the posts as they come in, and I'll integrate them into the Q&A that we have here over the next hour. So don't be shy. You don't have to wait to the end. If you've got a question, put it in there, and I'll make sure I see it. But the folks that we've got lined up, again, they come from the consulting world and from the world of higher education. Let me give you just some quick snapshots on each of these individuals. Marcus Fowler is the Director of Strategic Threat at Darktrace. He's a veteran of 15 years with the Central Intelligence Agency and also a retired Marine Corps officer. John Mumford is the President and Chief Risk Officer at the Fellsway Group, and he has extensive experience, a long career in managing information technology and cybersecurity in particular, including a whole range of cybersecurity programs in the corporate world. Great to have both of those gentlemen with us. The rest of our panelists, folks may know as really the Chief Information Officer Brain Trust for the state of Rhode Island. John Bartleson is the Assistant Vice President for Information Services and the Chief Information Officer at Rhode Island College. He has more than 20 years of experience in higher ed administration, and he oversees all of Rick's technology initiatives. Irving Bruckstein, my colleague at Salve Regina University, where he is our CIO and CISO. He has vast global experience in higher ed and in the business community, and brings those sensibilities to our university every day. Paul Fontaine serves as Associate Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Providence College, my alma mater. Go Friars. Paul had previously spent 11 years in corporate information technology and corporate information security, including as the Vice President and Information Security Officer for a top 10 national financial institution. Carlos Kaugers is the CIO at the University of Rhode Island. Prior to coming to the Ocean State, he was the CIO at SUNY Oneonta and chair of the SUNY Council of CIOs. And I hope I pronounced your name right, Carlos. Jacques Laflamme is the Chief Information Officer at the New England Institute of Technology. Previously, he served as the Director of Network Services at Harvard University, little school up the road some folks may have heard of. Chuck Locurdo is the Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Bryant University. He has extensive background both in public and private institutions. Let me rephrase that. In public sector institutions, he's worked in the private sector as well, and has extensive experience in information technology and cybersecurity. And finally, Mr. Rick Mccool is the Chief Information Officer at the Rhode Island School of Design. Prior to coming to RISD, he was the Chief Information and Technology Officer at Babson College, Northeastern University, and Wittenberg University. So, did I miss anybody? I think I got everybody, right? Okay, good. Well, gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today. I want to start just sort of with some broad understanding of the overall threat and environment that we're facing. And I thought we'd start with Mr. Fowler and Mumford about how what the threats you're seeing out there in the broader global landscape. And then from there, maybe we'll get into maybe how those things are manifesting in higher ed.
Sure.
So why don't we start with Marcus?
There, sorry, I jumped in there. Great to be here. Great to be with this great panel. Very excited, great conversation. I think from the threat landscape, you kind of have twofold. One is threat actors leaning in. They take advantage of anxiety, distraction, transformation, right? They see all that as new area of vulnerability. So you certainly see them leaning into this space. You can't help but point to ransomware, as well as just the explosion of spear phishing and those novel social engineering driven attacks, much more so than your traditional kind of click or malware laden emails. But I think the other side of this that's making it so complicated is this dependency, this really surging dependency on cyber and digital that has, companies, institutions needed to focus on maintaining business operations and business survival at a time when security teams then needed to catch up and look around and wonder where everybody went, where all the network has gone, and where have I lost visibility, right? And then because visibility, awareness, understanding is kind of that first step to security. So I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of maybe, I don't know about pause, but kind of gaining situational awareness to how the environment has changed from a vulnerability standpoint, where threat actors really haven't had to change dramatically. They're just taking advantage of how things are changing in our environments rather than needing to necessarily change their own tradecraft.
So, Marcus, I'm just informed enough to be a little dangerous, but when you say where the network has gone, do you mean literally because everybody's working from home, that it's geographically where the network has gone?
That's exactly right. Whether it's a work from home or even where you're hosting things, right? Less data center, more cloud heavy, SaaS applications. It's a big blind spot in terms of visibility and understanding. You just had a real change within both geographically as well as hosting and where things are moving throughout the digital environment of institutions and companies.
Super. John Mumford, does that track with what you're seeing at the Fellsway Group?
Yeah, totally agree. To me, the number one trend that has caused the threats to increase, right? If you added to your house, right, and added another set of rooms to your house, more doors, more windows, your attack surface just got bigger, right? So what Marcus is talking about is the dynamic workforce, that trend. Call it forced digital transformation. All of a sudden, the attack vector is way bigger. We have more devices connecting in. We don't know where those devices are connecting in from. We haven't taken the time to decide if they're trusted devices, et cetera. So that tracks 100% with what Marcus was saying, because how do we then gain visibility back the way we used to when it was inside our network? But adding to that is everybody's, spending online right now, and they're buying things like Ring devices. So the proliferation of IoT devices and connected devices, coupled with that dynamic workforce that I talked about, where is all this data going? And what data is worth protecting? And what data gets, aggregated with other data down the line that I didn't even intend to happen? So that dynamic workforce, the proliferation of devices that are always connected to things, and transmitting data. And then the last thing I'll say is this I'm calling it a perceived skills gap in security driving this, negative unemployment. It's really, that ties back to either our expectations are way too high, thinking that we need the rainbow colored unicorn to manage security, it really drives it back to you guys as the education. Everybody needs to be accountable to security, right? The confidentiality, integrity, and availability of everything that they do. So really, is there a skills gap, or is it our expectation that we need that rainbow colored unicorn and we should really invest in educating people, role-based education, right?
Interesting. I suspect we're going to wind up talking a little bit more about that before the day is done. I'd like to do a sort of a round robin here with the CIOs who are on this call. And particularly, I'd be curious, what are the top, let's say, one or two worries that you have every day from a cybersecurity perspective? And maybe, I'd be curious if that's materially different from what your worry was prior to the pandemic. I think that would be an interesting point of discussion. But let's just go right down the list in the order that I introduced you. So we'll start with John Bartleson from RIC.
Sure, Jim. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think for me, we tend to worry a lot about those things we have less control over, right? For me, those are we doing enough around security and situational awareness? Could we be doing more? The answer is always yes to that question. I think it's more important for all the reasons that John and Marcus just talked about during the pandemic and as we emerge from it. And the other thing I think about a lot is phishing campaigns, spear phishing. They're becoming more and more sophisticated. We're seeing a lot of lower order services that may not be as hardened defensively as the primary services. And those are the ones that the bad guys tend to go after once they find a hardened service on the top end.
Super, John. Irv from Solvay. You're muted, Irv.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to join with John. My top concern is social engineering, where cyber criminals tricking our community users into giving up sensitive information or access to that information. Those attacks we've observed becoming more sophisticated. Well, we're all familiar with the phishing email attack vector. Folks are now taking to using text messages on phone, voice messages. These are constant concerns, and with a dynamic workforce, and especially at a university where you have students coming and going through graduation and freshmen arriving, it's a constant challenge to keep the community aware to protect against that. The other big concern I have is the unknowns. What's coming over the horizon? A good portion of our confidence in securing environment is to know what the attack vectors are going to be, and also to know ourselves. With the era of the COVID pandemic, a lot of our community is now dispersed, working from home networks, home computers, which changes the landscape, and that makes things a bit more complex for us to maintain a good cybersecurity posture.
Paul, it looked like I've lost Paul on my screen here. Hey, there you are, Paul. Okay, how you doing?
I'm still hanging in there. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I mean, everything my colleague said is spot on. I think, one of the things that keeps me up at night constantly is thinking about institutional reputation. Never is it going to be more important to have that reputation, unsullied as we start to, bring students through the door again. From a security standpoint, I think, I think a lot since the pandemic, shift to workers being more mobile, everyone's reliance on multi-cloud services. I worry about, adapting business processes from a legacy on-campus method to a remote work scenario. We spend a lot of time, a lot of money, putting processes in place with the thought that people are going to be in their seats, going to be in their offices, and now they're mobile, and they're using insecure internet connections. They're using shared personal devices, and that just leads to that mentality of home mentality versus work security mindset, and trying to get them to think more along the lines of, this is work, and it's not home home games. And I think the other thing that's popped up for me that doesn't necessarily keep me up at night, but gets me up at night, is with the advent of far more e-gaming going on campus, we've seen an uptick in Ddos attacks. Whether it's retaliation or others, thanks to our partners at Ocean, that's why I say it gets me up at night, but doesn't keep me up at night because they mitigate it as fast as they come. So I think that's where I'm thinking these days.
Thank you so much. Carlos.
Sure, great to be here. I think a lot of the talk so far has been about different attack vectors and methods of penetration. But I think we also need to think a lot about some of our core systems. For example, I hold PII on close to 1 million people across the state of Rhode Island and well beyond. And part of the thing that keeps me up at night was that system was implemented 20 years ago. It's been modded, it's been adjusted, it's got bolt-ons, it's got add-ons, it's got this, that, and the third thing. The support system is announced end of life at 2030. And this is not something that is being constantly updated, constantly protected, constantly watched. But the situation there is much better than my other primary target, which is the intellectual property of my research faculty. And that space has another huge challenge to it, and that is that good cybersecurity is all about limiting access and controlling the threat surface and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the entire academic enterprise, particularly in research spaces, is oriented towards the free exchange of ideas and data. And so you have this huge cognitive dissonance happening between faculty members who are engaged in what one would consider public research, and then all of a sudden switching for a different project to something that is under NIST 800-171 guidelines, or even some tighter controls from the Defense Department. And helping them navigate these spaces and understanding what goes where and under what conditions can we run something in the wave tank and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, really does keep me up at night.
We're going to come back to some of that. I think you raised some really profound issues there, but let's go to Chuck from Bryant. And Chuck, you got to unmute yourself.
Hey guys, glad to be here. Thanks a lot. I thought I had it unmuted. So I was thinking, as everybody's talking, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how many acronyms there are in technology and security, because that's probably the number of things that I worry about. So to pick two, I sort of abstracted it to a higher level. So if you took a look at our strategy, we have 3 pillars of our strategy: connect, protect, and deliver. Don't worry all that much about delivery, because I can say with great confidence our team delivers. What I worry about is connect and protect, right? And I think we all know more than ever, the ability to get people connected to the internet and stay connected is what it's all about. Because the second that stops, more so than ever, all of our conveyor belt stops. If we really want to use a manufacturing sort of analogy there, everything stops, right? When things were on-prem, your local network was pretty important, right? But we're at a point where our ERP is in the cloud, Office 365, so there's no more mail on-prem, none of that stuff. So the ability to connect and stay connected is critical, and of course, protecting that environment, is what helps keep that thing up. So, it's hard to follow up on all the other thoughts that people worry about. I think that the thing that I bring up regularly with our team is, just too often you're seeing ransomware attacks, whether they be at hospitals or schools or wherever. And we always do sort of walkthroughs of, how do we feel protected, that we are to a degree insulated from these happening, or what would our responses be? So, I guess as CIOs, and some of you are security officers, we worry about everything. It gets us up at night, it keeps us up at night, it worries us during the day, but you got to have strategies and tactics to go approach it and solve it. So for me, it's all about connect and protect. And ransomware just is always on my mind, always on my mind.
And we'll come back to some of those solutions in just a minute. Because I am challenged with my alphabetization, I skipped over Jacques Laflamme, and I apologize for that. But Jacques, why don't you tell us from the New England Institute of Technology what worries you every day?
Well, going next to last, I sort of share and everybody's grief in this topic. But first and foremost, it is the fear of the unknown. But a little more specifically, it's in higher ed, not just higher ed, all industries. But we're limited with resources, whether it's staffing, time, and certainly budget. And I always have this worry when we start a new security related initiative, are we focusing on the right thing? Because it ends up being a bit of a game of whack-a-mole. You focus your efforts from a security perspective on, let's say, protection over here, and you have an issue over there with connectivity, so it's that whack-a-mole game. It's not really a fear, it's sort of the climate we've established. But that's it. Are we focusing on the right thing right now?
Thanks so much. And Rick, M in the alphabet, but at the end of the alphabet today, could you share your thoughts and your perspective from RISD?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm always concerned about is one of the biggest vulnerabilities, which is our end users, right? And so that's where, the spear phishing attacks are being, actually effective. And so, how do we keep them educated, self-protected? And when all of this stuff is, changing quickly, right? And it is getting more sophisticated. And so, we can only keep them as informed as we are, right? And it's very difficult. And for, our end community, what we talk about is that they are not necessarily technical. And so all of this stuff is foreign to them, and it's sort of an inconvenience, right? But they are a critical component of this. And what ends up happening, and which is also a big concern of mine linked to this, is that, my staff end up spending a lot of their time now following up on the person who clicked the link and provided their password and what the potential impact of that is, right? And so the time that they should be spending on more important, valuable things on campus in the security realm, and so this gets to Jacques' point, they're being taken away from that, right? And we can't invest in some of the higher value things. And then the second thing that sort of keeping me up now is that we've done a pretty good job of moving, most of our key assets out into the cloud. And so we are, relying a lot on cloud vendors for that protection. However, we still have, some important assets on campus. And now, through VPN, we have a bunch of devices and people, connecting on campus, whereby, we have some visibility into that, but it concerns me, right, that we're now introducing those other vulnerabilities that we had a little bit more control over when we knew it was, our PCs that were on campus. But part of that, being in higher ed, we've always had the student population that we could identify and treat differently and, hopefully secure them more readily. But now with the VPN for faculty and staff, it's a little bit more different and challenging.
Well, so I want to remind folks who are listening and watching that if you've got questions that you'd like to put to the members of the panel, please go to the Q&A option in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to type in any question you want. I will share them with our great panel, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as you like. But let's go on with some other questions now. Several of you have spoken sort of about the cultural challenges. I'm going to call it a cultural challenge that you face with sort of non-IT specialists who are your principal users. So, Carlos, you talked in particular about sort of the cultural shift between the idea of securing your intellectual property, but on the research side of the house, people just wanting to share that stuff freely. How do you approach? How do you navigate that cultural divide between those two different mindsets? And what are some of the techniques that you use to encourage compliance?
Well, it is, I think it's an unsolvable problem fundamentally, right? And part of it is hiring a great CISO, because the CISO's job is to make sure that things are appropriately controlled. And my job is to avoid him shooting himself in the foot, because the faculty do not react well to any notion of limiting access and circumscribing their activities. I think there's a couple of aspects to this. One is certainly the clout of the federal government and our granting agencies, right? And once people start hearing about people's research grants being pulled because the data was inadvertently shared, behavior changes radically. I'll give you an example just from our security training activities. So we have security training available for all employees of the university as well as our students. And some areas have mandated it, particularly areas like finance and administration, student affairs that are more administratively oriented. Other areas have strongly encouraged it. And still other areas have been in a mode of here it is, take it if you want it. And the thing that really worked with a take it if you want it group was that we had a person on our campus in one of those units who bought some gift cards and sent them off, and then asked the university to reimburse them for the cost of those gift cards because the email came to their official URI email. And we published that, shared that information with others who were kind of lackadaisical about having their staff, and all of a sudden activity ramped up and compliance wrapped up, and it I think a lot of it revolves around people thinking that security incidents happen elsewhere, right? And once you drive that message home that it's here at URI, it is in your departments, you are risking the reputation of the university, you are risking the loss of your federal research dollars, and you are risking your personal funds if you don't participate in these kind of awareness activities. And that has changed perspectives on our campus. Is everybody at URI fully committed to the concept of maintaining a high level of security? No, it would be a total and absolute lie to say that, right? But we are chipping away at it through these kinds of activities.
Well, it's sort of related to that question, Jacques. I wonder if you can tell us how you approach the challenge of preparing, whether it's your middle managers or even, I'm thinking the leadership of the university, to understand and manage the risk that you face just by operating. Is there anything that you do in particular to help educate folks about that risk?
Yeah, sure. So we kicked off a program almost 4 years ago, a NIST-based, cybersecurity program. But risk awareness has sort of been our biggest challenge, and it's, I think Carlos mentioned the word culture. I mean, it's spot on. Culturally, at New England Tech, information security has, throughout the industry, it's not perceived as it's perceived as an IT responsibility. So to sort of address this, when we kicked off our program, we started to work more closely with General Counsel and our VP of Finance, highlighting finance as one of our largest risks. And a lot of it was not really on paper. Some of it was just to sort of change that culture, change the paradigm, sort of driving home that message that, we hear throughout the industry. Cybersecurity is not an IT issue, it's a business issue. Right. We put a lot of time and effort into specifically rewording our information security and acceptable use policies, specifically to emphasize best practices and most importantly, I guess, to highlight our own areas of risk. But other things like DLP awareness, data loss prevention awareness, and DLP alerting tools have helped a lot too. And again, to adjust that culture. We're now able to provide metrics on frequent offenders and those areas of greatest risk. And by that, I mean sort of being able to have some metrics that we can share with folks, not necessarily looking, for punitive action, but more so just to evangelize that, again, cybersecurity is not an IT issue, but it should be based on best practices. We've also taken full advantage the last couple of years on Cybersecurity Month to educate and reemphasize the most popular poor practices that we have here at the school and the most popular risks that we seem to fall victim to. But most importantly, though, I think for my own involvement is a couple of years ago, I on a semi-annual basis, I'm able to get in front of our board of trustees in the room or virtually this year to basically review the state of New England tech information security. And what this has done, I guess, is gotten cybersecurity, information security, a seat at the grown-ups table, if you will. So it's made a lot of that those evangelizing efforts a lot more credible here. So we're chipping away to change things, but again, Carlos was spot on. He mentioned the word culture, I think, in his first sentence, and it really is. It's trying to change the way people view the responsibilities or the onus of information security.
That's interesting. I wonder, and again, folks, if you've got questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A or the chat. Rick Mccool, I think about if we move from that global perspective down to more to an operational level, how much of what you're doing when you're sort of becoming aware of new threats and new vulnerabilities in your systems, how much of that is based on someone actually exploits you, and while you found you closed the barn door after the horse has left, as my grandmother would say, or how much of it is analysts on your staff who are aware and they're paying attention to trends in industry? How much of it is sort of the school of hard knocks versus just sort of patient and detailed attention to what's going on?
So fortunately, we've invested in Darktrace, not to give a plug, but into Darktrace, and we've also invested in a security operations center. And having those sort of eyes, whether they're electronic or human, is really important for us because it really is keeping us up to date on any current threats and or issues that we can respond to, or it's flagging us for potential alerts that we need to investigate. And like I said, I really only have one security professional on my staff, and so I really have to prioritize where they're focused, and those tools are really helping with that.
Excellent.
Again, without those tools and really relying on Darktrace to embed in all of the latest artificial intelligence, right, for these potential threats. That's the way we sort of stay on top of it, because I could never staff up to it. I don't think any organization could do that without the help of automation.
John, I see you nodding. John Bartleson, I see you nodding in agreement with Rick on this. I'm curious, what role. When you think about the threats that your institution faces, particularly the threats to students and to faculty, are these unique given the industry that we're in, or are they about what you would expect just for a general population facing, operating and working online today?
I think it's a little bit of both, Jim. Carlos touched on this a little bit earlier, and those of us in academia, we realize that it is traditionally a place for the free exchange of ideas. So by definition, we need to be a more open and collaborative place. Threat actors know this, of course, so that makes us from that perspective, it makes us a unique target. In higher ed, we have to find the right balance between hardening and fostering that culture of openness. So for me, that means that we have to focus on and aggressively promote information security programs and cybersecurity awareness in our communities. And we have to simultaneously support the creation of appropriate spaces for that free exchange of ideas. So that's not an easy task, but it's something that everybody on this panel, the higher ed CIOs in particular, we face those types of decisions on a daily basis. And it comes down to risk management at the end of the day.
Well, when we're talking about risk management and in particular visualizing those risks, I'm looking at Irv from Solvay and Paul from PC. How do you are there specific tools that you use to assess and analyze those risks? Do you maintain a dashboard? What are the kinds of things that you do to communicate, even just within your team, about the risks that you're facing? Paul, why don't we start with you?
Well, I mean, from our preferred management tools to look at risk and readiness, we rely heavily on what I do have for trained and dedicated in-house staff. They provide high-level updates based on in-house application reports, third-party industry-based information sharing centers, outside consulting services. So, they're the ones that, I'm blessed in that I do have some security professionals working for us. And, back to Jacques' point, key to getting that kind of staff put in place was, me being able to get in front of those trustees at least twice a year to be able to explain to them, just how important is cybersecurity. And getting the resources from them, to allow us to go forward with being able to protect us. As far as dashboards go, we don't currently have a formal dashboard. Certainly nothing automated, but we've started evaluating more formal GRCs, government governance, risk, and compliance platforms, and hope to have one in place very soon.
Irv from Solvay.
Thank you, Jim. We have a multifaceted approach to visualizing our risks and managing things, which differ from a tactical day-to-day approach to a more longer-term strategic. So for day-to-day tactical, our go-to tool is, in fact, Darktrace. It uses machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's a combination of an intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, and an incident management tool. The graphic visualization on that and how it displays your active threats, in my view, it's one of the best in the industry today. It really is state of the art. We also, of course, have a distributed environment. And while Darktrace is predominantly used at Solvay for our internal campus environment, when we go to the cloud, we look to our trusted partners. We use elements of Cisco Umbrella, which includes DNS protection and also cloud access security broker visibility, and the Office 365 Microsoft suite. They've added a whole portfolio of security tools which give us tremendous visibility there. On a longer term perspective, we hire ethical hackers. We have them do penetration tests, both internal and external, and that gives us a view from the hacker's perspective of what our risks and vulnerabilities are, and importantly, how we benchmark in terms of the broader industry in the United States, as well as specifically within the higher education vertical. And lastly, one of the most effective tactical tools that we use is to masquerade as the cyber criminal. So we, in fact, take publicly available information and we phish our community. We put malware on key fobs. We scatter them throughout the campus. We do targeted spear phishing and other targeted attacks to executives who have access to the most sensitive information. And the tools that we use allow us to track how those attacks have played out. And anyone who we feel is a risk based on their behaviors in those attacks, we bring them in for training and community awareness sessions. So in summary, a portfolio of tools, a multifaceted approach, and it's constantly having to be evaluated because you're never really done, but you need an operating model of early detection, rapid response, and continuous improvement.
I can tell you that once I learned that that Irv was scattering key fobs around campus, it made me think twice. Every time I am handed one of those things, is this Irv? Because the last thing I want to do is be caught in one of his dragnets. Chuck, I'm listening to this conversation, and I'm wondering if there are any particular security frameworks that you find particularly useful when you're trying to harden your environment, the environment at Bryant, in this current environment.
I think Jacques mentioned NIST earlier. I wouldn't be surprised if everybody here has adopted NIST to some extent. There's a series of frameworks out there, but NIST is it is the probably most commonly adopted one within higher ed. It is relatively broad, so it does the job for us. I'm not an expert in any sense on frameworks. We certainly rely on our security officer to help do that, but it still all gets down to the diligence around monitoring and controls. And I think it was one of the gentlemen just mentioned it. I don't know if it was Rick or John. The place that we lack, I don't want to sit here and cry we don't have resources, but okay, we have one security guy. Okay. And we just recently, 2 months ago, moved somebody from our web and integration team over to become, to start a career over on the security side. So he's ramping up. And if you look back to where we were, we had nothing in 2015. So in 2015, we established a security officer. We put the framework in place. We've done Cisco Red Team exercises, and we learned a lot. We had auditors come in and do a controls assessment, and we learned a lot. We've been fixing things all along the way. And quite frankly, as recent as this morning, 8:30 this morning on my biweekly security management team meeting, we had a relatively heated discussion because I don't think any of us are happy with where we are. But if you just step back and look and say, oh my gosh, look what we've accomplished. We've got pretty solid dashboards in place, third-party assessments. We're doing internal controls assessments, but we got like one guy, okay? And so what we've done is, I can't afford to have 3 or 4 men and women doing this. So we've taken each of the disciplines, and a person in each of those disciplines has a piece of the responsibility. So you could say to yourself, well, that's a bit bifurcated. Does that work really well? Or you can say, wow, that's great, because now, everybody owns security. So the help desk, they own endpoint security. Right? The server team, they own that side. The ISO, he owns controls and training and other things. So, one of the things that we're looking at is, and it sort of helps in the, sleeping better at night, is an RFP out for a managed detection and response service. And the original numbers are pretty high. And I wouldn't say we argued about it this morning. We had a good conversation around, how much does that cost and how many people would it take to do it yourself? Well, you can never do it for the cost that we're getting presented. But the question is how do I go convince folks to spend money on this? And I'm fortunate, just like some of the others who had a chance to report out to the board. So, we gave a great presentation to the board and sort of highlighted the plethora of events that take place that need to be looked at. So just for giggles, right? And this isn't even the tip of the iceberg, but what we reported to the board was we had 2.8 billion events that took place this quarter.
Wow.
And told them, I don't want to reveal, we're only capturing a small fraction of the things that should report into that 2.8 billion, right? So we know that when and hopefully we do get an MDR in place, the number of things that we find is actually, we talked about this today, it's not going to be reduced. The number of things we find is going to increase because we're going to have more eyes on glasses, as we sometimes use as an expression. So, you know, the frameworks are good. You know, you pick the one that's most appropriate, you know, prioritize where you need to spend your time, which we've done. We've got a security program that prioritizes our risk areas. We try to focus on it. But, you know, my security management team, there's 5 of us. It's a subset of my leadership team. And, you know, I think we go into that meeting with butterflies and we come out, you know, we need to do better. And we're trying hard, and we're so much better than we were a year ago or a couple of years ago. But, you know, we just need help, and we're going to find that help, and we're going to get it.
You know, one of the themes that I hear sort of emerging from across this is sort of the need to engage those C-suite leaders. If we're talking about higher ed, we're talking about the presidents and their cabinets, perhaps. If we're talking about the private sector, you know, these are the business owners, the business leaders, the executive teams. For John Mumford and Marcus Fowler, I'm curious, you know, what approaches work best for sort of encouraging that dialogue between the CIOs and the CISOs and that C-suite management, some of whom may or may not be part of that C-suite team, depending on the institution. But John Mumford, let's start with you. What kind of best practices do you recognize and encourage?
Sure. Number one, it's got to be a risk dialogue. Can't be about, you know, if I'm the CISO at Bryant talking to Chuck saying, hey, I want to meet with the board, and I'm going to tell them we need $10,000 to fix a cross-site scripting error on server X. He's going to say, don't go to the board because they don't know what you just said. What's a cross-site scripting error? But if I said, hey, 60% of our revenue flows through this, you know, website, and that website is, you know, managed by this IT server, and that server is degrading due to these vulnerabilities, we need to invest to preserve that 60%. Have a risk dialogue. Otherwise, you're wasting your time talking to the C-suite. And that then translates into, okay, so who's the real business owner for the risk, right? IT owns informing you of the risk, not managing the risk and making decisions. So now the person who owned that 60% revenue generating digital process is the owner to decide, I don't want that risk impacting my objectives or my sales quota or whatever. I'm using like you said, a corporate thing. So it's got to be a risk dialogue that will translate into business owners and leaders paying more attention to, you know, the needs of that process that they own and engaging them in the risk dialogue. And then the last thing I'll say is, don't ever walk in talking about, we actually, the name of this panel is about security posture. Yeah. And to me, security posture is giving a status on all the controls and measures, and eyes are going to glaze over. You got to translate that into security maturity. Maturity is about, you know, capabilities and progress. So make it a risk dialogue, associate those risks to a business owner, and talk more about maturity and capability and progress, not about the controls and the, you know, the vulnerabilities and things like that.
Marcus, would you add anything to that?
Sure, and very well put, John. I would make one comment from a thread that we've heard throughout that, and that it started with that, is it a skills gap? Is it a unicorn gap? And really what it is, it's a cycles gap, right? We have more work than people. We don't necessarily need to throw people at it, but you need more cycles. And certainly for us as a company, you know, just AI augmentation, augmenting the human team, doing autonomous triage, bringing more enabling power to the people that are there, we found to be incredibly beneficial. So I think thinking about a gap, I really think it is a workload and prioritization of human expertise and where you want your humans working. I think to the translation to that C-suite, that board, I think risk, dialogue, exactly right what John said, translating into that return on investment that isn't technically laden, but it actually is pointing to all the different areas that it's bringing value. And I like the idea of thinking about collaborators in that room, right? Whether it's legal or whether it's the research and development and that critical IP and all the things, that kind of building the collaboration, because we can own the security, but owning the value of that security is actually across the entire, everybody that's sitting in that room. And for us, we always have to, and I got this question a number of times, well, how do you showcase value for something that was a non-event, in that we did our security job, a security bad thing didn't happen? What can I point to say that was worth, those dollars? And we do a lot of discussion around the company. And I think it does talk about efficiency, value, and also collaboration, not only between people in the room, but the tools within your security ecosystem. I actually have increasingly moved around the idea of a security stack, because that to me are things layered and not necessarily bringing value to each other and collaborating and working together. But the more you can integrate and bring things that are working across your entire kind of ecosystem, both digital and security wise, the more you can point to kind of a healthy security apparatus that's doing what it's supposed to do and bringing the most to the table.
So we've got about 5 minutes left in the program. If folks have questions that they want to throw onto the table, speak now or forever hold your peace, I'm afraid. But one of the things that I know has received a fair amount of conversation, at least at my institution, has been what the Internet of Things is going to mean for the way we operate and the challenges that we face as an institution, keeping our network secure. I'm curious. I'll start with my colleague Irv because I know that this is something that he's given some thought to. How does the Internet of Things change the way you operate? What are some of the specific challenges that you face?
Sure. Well, with the Internet of Things, it creates many more intrusion points for attackers to take control of. One of the biggest concerns that I have with the IoT and the proliferation of these devices is the dreaded DDoS, or distributed denial of service attack. So this is where a cyber criminal will activate thousands of devices all at once and attempt to overwhelm your resources. Even if you have a good layered defense at your firewall to protect, the volume is so much that it overwhelms and it takes down your actual operational services. And in those cases, the best defense is having a trusted network services provider partner like we do with Ocean. So we have actually experienced DDoS attacks, and Ocean, with all of their tremendous resources, is our front line of defense and defending against that. From within campus, of course, it's that many more devices that we have to be concerned about. Any IP addressable device that's on our data network could be a potential threat or vulnerability to us that we have to manage.
I'm wondering if we might do a quick round robin here, just as we close things out. And I see that when we're wrapping up here, our friend Dave Marble from Ocean is going to say a few words on the way out. But I wonder if we could just go around, particularly for the guys in higher ed. I'm curious whether or not all of the things that you needed to do, and I think probably some institutions were better positioned than others for how they would make that transition to remote learning, for example. But how did all of the things that you had to do in responding to the pandemic shape your ability to move forward on your pre-programmed plans for this current academic year? If you just take literally 30 seconds each, and we'll just run through the room on that. So let's start with Rick Mccool. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, excellent. And so what the pandemic pivot sort of allowed us to do was invest in making a lot of the technology moves in a short period of time that would have taken forever at the institution. And we had a lot of buy-in to be able to start using collaborative tools like Zoom. We were able to implement a single LMS. And we were able to upgrade the VPN. And again, all of this was done within 6 months. And so it's actually turned out to be good for us.
Does that have the potential to change your business model as you offer instruction?
Yes, exactly. And that's sort of one of the, and I sort of joke with my colleagues that, we're now able to have conversations around online learning and distributed learning that were off the table just 2 or 3 years ago when we were having our strategic, institutional strategic planning discussions. Because RISD being such a maker campus, right, where physical space, studios, shops were so important, a lot of people could not think about how can we transform that and deliver an exceptional educational experience just using digital tools. And so I'm actually very excited about the future and what we've been able to accomplish. So.
Fascinating. Chuck Liccardo, how has the pandemic affected your planning, the programming that you had intended for 2020, 2021?
Yeah, so I was making notes on this one here. So, I would say from our classroom, our academic computing and media services team, just complete, I would say, I'll say complete change of direction. I mean, they were all hands on deck. We were creating a hybrid environment to be able to teach 50% of the students in person, 50% of the students remote, either in their dorms or library, and international students were always going to be remote. So we created a platform that can teach anybody, anywhere, anytime, any method. That was hardcore. So that sort of changed. Fortunately, we got the money to invest heavily into that environment. So we're poised to be able to, I'd like to think, get new revenue streams once we sort of get back to steady state because of our offering. On the infrastructure side, we had to pivot to 100% of the employees and students remote back in March, but we had all the tools and technologies in place. Our help desk did an amazing job of lending out over 200 laptops to users to be able to work from home. We have a laptop program, so we usually have lots of extra equipment on hand. That was just normal process on steroids because we only usually have about 5 people working remote. We now had hundreds. But the thing that ironically stayed steady state is the plans that we had on infrastructure, what we were doing with our firewalls, what we were doing with our routers, what we were doing in the dorms, that pretty much stayed on task. And we got all that stuff done. We still, I think wireless activity in dorms at all universities, I understand, struggled a bit with Zoom. So that was a real curveball for us as to how Zoom consumes network bandwidth. So that was the one place where we'll be looking to make some improvements come February when our students come back. But so some of our plans flipped, others stayed on track.
So your point about Zoom is true in my house too, but that's a different conversation. Jacques Laflamme, tell us about NEIT.
Sure, yeah. Story is not at all unlike what Chuck just mentioned. I mean, we started to use the term ubiquitous. We've provided basically a ubiquitous classroom experience, whether the faculty member is doing 100% on campus hybrid or 100% offline. Nobody has to bring that requirement to our attention anymore. I mean, when I say we, I mean the IT department. They can just go ahead and proceed. We've got remote, mobile, video conferencing units that we can move around to classrooms, so the registrar's office doesn't get bogged down with trying to schedule rooms that have the appropriate technology in them, et cetera. So again, we created an environment from March to April. We were presented with this insurmountable task of pushing through this. And by June, we were back to strategic initiatives and not so much up to our neck in trying to make folks work remote and learn remote during this pandemic. So again, all the credit goes to the staff. We just realized we were so nimble, so resourceful, and so dedicated and loyal to our mission. Again, it's just insurmountable task presented to us, and we got through it. And again, we've created this sort of ubiquitous learning environment. We're very proud of it.
Excellent. Carlos.
Same here as Chuck and Jock. So the big change this year was doing that, set up in every classroom so that the faculty could teach remote and in person at the same time. But I think it bears mentioning here that from our perspective, this was part of a larger strategic initiative. For those of you who are unaware, our president set some ambitious goals a few years ago to engage in 21st century anytime, anywhere learning. And this was our opportunity to really drive that strategic priority forward. And the really surprising aspect of this is so everything is auto-recorded. The students can go back and engage with the classroom material at any time. The amount of student engagement with the recorded material has been astounding. And I mean astounding. It has been one of the most popular services we offer. And the other thing I think that bears mentioning here is the pandemic has allowed us to accelerate tremendously the rethinking of how we deliver service across campus. So this fall, we didn't have an in-person service desk anymore. That's a thing of the past. All of my folks are on Zoom. Everybody knows to connect through that platform. My staff can work remote anywhere, anytime. And that just would have never happened before the pandemic. And while it's been a long-term goal of mine to support my staff's desire to work from where they want, when they want, that culture of you must be present at the service desk, you must be present as a smiling face on campus, has been completely wiped off the map. Right. And so I keep coming back to this culture idea, but it really is true that COVID has given us an opportunity to radically shift the culture of our institutions in both of these spaces.
Interesting. Paul Fontaine from Smith Hill. No, that's another school. That's from Smith Street.
Street.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the pandemic has definitely given us some opportunities. I would say, prioritization shifted dramatically because of the pandemic. Prioritization on spend, as Chuck mentioned, a lot of money for all of us went into our classroom technology. I think something that's going to come out of that, and that I talked to the faculty about today, is that that's not going to go away. It's going to hopefully become a tool in their toolbox. We'll never be a Southern New Hampshire university, but why not use those tools that we've put in place and that the faculty are now using? Whether it's for winter sessions as sources of income we never had before. Summer sessions, our athletes, we have our men's basketball team in North Carolina this week. Rather than relying on classmates' notes or tutors to teach, they can attach remotely and synchronously or asynchronously take part in the actual professor's class. So these are things we never had before. Study abroad, that hopefully will live on, post-pandemic. I would say our training area within IT has just, out of necessity, become so much stronger. We had faculty members that were saying, why didn't we have this technology before? And we'd say, we've had it all along. You just chose not to partake in it. But now they need training. So our training, group was just as busy as our academic media services. And then I'd say probably, personally, the biggest thing that's come out of this pandemic is just the collaboration that I've garnered with the people that are on this panel right here. We went from meeting once a month, over breakfast just to talk about strategy and roadmaps, to now we meet every other week. And I have to say, just the collaboration amongst these other schools have been invaluable to us being successful, both in the pivot we had in the spring, and then offering quality in the fall to bring our students onto campus where our bread and butter is. So, I thank all of them for their help and their collaboration.
Let's go to John Bartleson. John, your perspectives.
So similar to RISD, we at RIC were 95% in person pre-pandemic. So we had to do a pretty big pivot in March to go to effectively 95% remote. So we used it as a jumping point like everybody else did. We were able to standardize on Zoom for teaching and video conferencing. We created a virtual computer laboratory for academic software and secured it. which because we don't want people in physical computer labs in the middle of a global pandemic, right? So having a virtual computer laboratory had a huge impact on our students and their ability to access academic software. We invested in hardware for students, classroom technology like lecture capture. I think it positions us well to move more programs fully online when the academic departments are ready, much like New England NEIT. It was an all-hands community effort at RIC, and I'm proud of the entire IT staff and my faculty colleagues. Everybody pitched in, and we made it happen.
Super. Irv, you want to bring us home?
Sure. Thank you, Jim. Well, consistent with my colleagues, we had a major business transformation event when COVID hit. The impact to our current plans, with the exception of one in-flight project, which was just coincidentally good fortune for us, of putting state-of-the-art gigabit wired and wireless networking in every single residence hall on campus, which served us well. We stopped our entire tactical plan for the year and pivoted to build a program portfolio of 20 work streams, all of which were critically essential for us to preserve and sustain our business model. Salve, as you know, took a bit of a different approach. We didn't just want to function. We wanted to deliver the essence of who and what we are as an organization. And we coined the phrase virtual salve and how we could bring that campus experience to the greatest extent possible to people in our community, regardless of where they were, be it on campus, remote in their homes, shifting to different locations for co-curricular activities. So a lot of the technology that we put in place was beyond the classroom. We had emergency kits that we had so that within 15 minutes notice, we could deliver video streaming and dual modality teaching and learning spaces to any place that we had network connections. The thing that I would most note about this is we have an exceptional community of collaboration of CIOs in higher education here in Rhode Island. We all have similar stories because we all collaborated and we helped each other out and worked very closely together. And I think that was instrumental for our collective success. The silver lining is there's nothing that anyone on this panel could have done to get such rapid transformation to adoption of teaching and learning technologies and other remote mobile community technologies had the pandemic not occurred. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see which institutions adapt and actually take advantage of those to mature their business models after the pandemic is over.
Super, Irv. Thank you so much. Hey, we've got a question here from a student, and I absolutely want to make sure this gets responded to. So maybe this would go to either Marcus or John. But the question is, what tips would you have for a college student studying cybersecurity? How can they best position themselves for employment after graduation? Well, this will be our last question.
I'll jump in first over Marcus. Sorry, Marcus, but I think a lot of the focus and attention on cybersecurity is in the trenches of doing security analytics and forensics and things like that. I think an aspect that you should add to your cybersecurity training is still gain some business acumen, because if you don't know how a business operates and makes money, how do you know what you're securing and protecting?
Great. Marcus?
No, I think that was very well said. And I think, yeah, mixing both your deep technical understanding of what's happening within your environment or the next generation of things that are coming, getting smart in things like containers and cloud and some of these things that things are progressing to, while at the same time having a good sense of what a threat hunting or analysis, right? Because those two skill sets, right? That targeter analysis and that cyber technologist or cyber engineer, they are two sides, and having a good, rich understanding of both, it would be great. But I think that as unicorn, pick the one you really like, but be sure you keep a foot with the other one so that you're smart in that space as well. And you heard us talk about the cycles gap a number of times. So certainly you're on a good path.
Well, super. Gentlemen, I want to thank all of you. I'm going to kick it over to Dave Marble here, but let me say, as someone who is on the downstream side of the tremendous work that you all do, I think I could speak safely for all of my colleagues at your institutions and just say thank you. This year has been one of remarkable challenges, and I know at least at Salve, it's been the steadfastness of the IT department that has enabled so much of what we've been able to do. just spending some time with you, getting ready for this event, and listening to your remarks today. I know that that experience is shared widely across the institutions in Rhode Island, and we're all in your debt. So thank you. Before we wrap it up, I want to turn it over to our great friend Dave Marble from Ocean for just a few closing words. Dave, over to you.
Jim, thanks so much. And before I forget, for our student who asked that question about tips, the one for me is to be aggressive about an internship. Having just hired our recent intern at Ocean during the COVID situation to be a cybersecurity permanent employee, and I know Katie's on the call probably listening today, I think the recommendation to be aggressive about an intern to get that real world business understanding that you get, that was mentioned earlier by our friends at Doctors. I think that's very important. There are a couple of things that emerged, as patterns in this discussion, and I know all of you, many of my members on this panel are colleagues for a long time now. Is some people were talking about, well, the endpoint, moved, they moved to the home or some remote facility. Oh yeah, and by the way, the source moved too. That moved to the cloud, and so. This idea that I had this self-contained environment, now the endpoints, moved to two different locations, source and destination. And in the meantime, the internet is not the internet that we were used to. We used to do this bulk, transfer of data to these bulk ISPs, that would then take all the information and send it out essentially over the quote internet. Today, we route all of these payloads specifically. And so they have all individual routes and treatment to get to their destinations. And that changes security dramatically because the entire fabric of how these payloads are actually traversing, the world are completely different. And so it challenges, I'm actually quite amazed at what we all accomplished in the last 6 months. The internet itself, I have some purview to the national infrastructure things that went on over the last 6 months. The internet, by the way, got way better during that time. All of these major peering points were all upgraded. And in the normal course of events, a lot of those peering points were, kick the can down the road kind of thing. Well, they all went, from 10 gig to 100 gig to from 100 gig to 400 gig interfaces, and really souped up what is essentially the fundamental infrastructure of the internet. But now you have to think about this mosaic of the different problem sets that attack, and one of them being denial of service attacks that, we put in essentially a perimeter defense around our member networks such that you're not getting these denial of service attacks, which, by the way, have gone up on the order of doubling since we all got back to school in September. So the number of attacks just in that one category, doubled, in September. Jacques made an important point that he went from what was panic and, reactionary, processes in the first 3 to 4 months to now systemic and strategic infrastructure kinds of things. And Ocean has been very much along those lines. Somewhere in the middle of the summer, y'all switched, to these much more strategic and long-term initiatives that will have long and lasting effects. Things that might have been simple before, like getting access to a library to get on a computer, we're now putting in, Wi-Fi parking lots, all over the state, so that if the library happens to be closed, you can still sit in your car and get on the internet. So there's lots of things that we're trying to do now that are systemic for long-term viability in this kind of new architecture. And again, I can't thank my colleagues enough and the members of our community for working together the way you have. And lastly, Jim, you did a great job as always. Excellent work. Love your style, man. And just thanks to everybody on the panel. You did a great job.
Dave, the check is in the mail. Everybody, thank you so much for being with us today. I wish you all happy holidays and great health, and hopefully we'll see you in person. Come to Newport in the summer when everything's better. We'll see you soon.
Thanks all. Take care.